What I want to tell people about that is getting help and encouragement from other people who have made the decision to surrender their life to Christ is great. But you have to find out what's going to work for you.
Command, Engine 10, first line attack, making entry.
Well, Chief Parker, I'm super excited to have you on the show and welcome to First Line Faith. I really appreciate the opportunity that you extended to us by interviewing with us today and giving us your thoughts and feelings and some of the different things that you've experienced in your career. I think one of the things that I'd like to start with is just kind of an introduction of who you are professionally as well as maybe personally a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Also, thank you for having me. I'm excited as you are to be here as well and to speak to my fellow brothers about obviously the fire service and how faith is such a big part of my how I feel and what I do in the service. So just real quick, I've been in the fire service professionally since 1985 started with the department and actually moved from the EMS side into the fire side. And
so you started in EMS?
Started in EMS. Did 2 years on a 911 service. Decided that was not going to be for me. Although I still carry my paramedic to this day. This is the 40th year, but right. I wanted something different. The fire department kept calling to me, so I was very, very fortunate and blessed to be offered a position, and that position lasted a little over 32 years.
Wow.
With that department. I was again lucky and blessed enough to be able to find a job as a fire chief with another fire department that was very close by, and I'm in my 7th year in that position right now.
That's awesome, and I know we kind of attend some of the same get-togethers and some of the same meetings sometimes, and you offer a lot to our industry, to our area, and I think you'll also offer a whole lot of different things through the podcast that we're doing too here today. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, you sent me some documentation and some different things in regards to your leadership and a lot of other things. And one thing that really stuck out to me was that in one of those documents, you said that you had a rediscovery of faith in 2003. And I'd kind of like to go through that if you're willing to share and kind of tell us that story.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. And it's quite a long story. Of course, it took me a long time to get there. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about it as much as you're willing to allow me to. So
absolutely.
2003, I was lost. I was lost in my personal life. I was lost in my professional life. I was lost in my marriage. I was lost in my faith. I was just lost. Mm-hmm. With that, I will tell you, I wasn't lost in any addictions, whether it be drugs, alcohol, mm-hmm. Any sort of extramarital activity, anything of that nature. As a matter of fact, I didn't know I was lost, Brian, until an incident happened at work mm-hmm. that brought me to a realization that I needed to change. I knew I had to change. I knew before that time I had to change. I was simply trying to do it on my own, mm-hmm. Trying to self-medicate, if you will, with everything other than the Lord, everything other than where I needed to be, which was whole and within Jesus Christ. I don't want to say that I fought that. It's an interesting thought process for me. Mm-hmm. It was almost like I didn't want to bother the Lord with my problems. I knew I could fix them on my own, mm-hmm. and I could continue to just go the way I was. Mm-hmm. But obviously, that was wholly incorrect. So, I obviously was a regular churchgoer, which is how I'll put it.
Before this started?
Before this started, yeah, we were a member of a church for quite some time, for quite a number of years. Myself, my wife, and our children. But I just really wasn't. I was going through the motions, and I really wasn't getting the message that I needed to get. It just took. And I can't explain it. It just took one instance, and it wasn't anything that was. It wasn't a near-death experience. It wasn't anything that I necessarily got in trouble about. But it was just something that shook me and told me that hey, you need help, and the help isn't going to come anywhere except from our Savior. So
it's kind of an awakening. It sounds
it was.
like
It was.
Yeah.
It was definitely an awakening. It was something that I needed. So I got a little bit deeper in the church, and I got a little bit of help there, and I started to talk to some people there that I knew about, what I was going through, and I just decided one day, I had heard, I guess when this was going on, I was about 42 years old at the time.
Okay. And it sounded like at that point, you'd been in emergency services for about 8 years.
No,
Is that about
since
right?
I was 25.
Okay.
So it had been almost 20 years.
Okay.
So, I had, at the end of every service, like many Christian services, they talked about baptism and like that. And I'm like, as most people have been in the Christian faith, have been baptized, at birth, baptized in the flesh, but I'd never been baptized in the Spirit. And I didn't really understand what that meant. I'd always heard it, but I didn't understand what it meant. And then,
so what is, just for a moment, if you might embellish a little bit, can you explain kind of what that means to you? And just in the event that somebody might not have experienced that themselves.
Yeah, and yes, Brian, and like you and I have discussed before, I'm not the type of person that runs around, and I don't wear my faith on my sleeve, and I don't run around and cite Bible verses to try to get my point across. I try to use how I treat other people, how I treat myself, how I go about my day-to-day activities. You and I have talked about this, and you've even said, you can, I can see what type of person you are, just how
characteristic,
how I carry myself. So,
absolutely.
So with that, what does it mean to me? Being baptized in the Spirit, I think to me means that you have come to the realization that you can't do it alone, that we can't do it alone.
Gotcha.
So many of us try to do it alone, but we can't do it alone. And then, like I said, people start self-medicating, whether that's with alcohol, whether it's with drugs, whether it's with sex, whether it's with, racing cars, you name it. People try to fill that void, and you can't fill that void.
Yep. I've been there before too. I went through something very similar. So I understand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure. And I think everybody does to some extent. But I think once you surrender yourself to the will of God, to what you should have surrendered yourself to long ago, I think that you start looking at life, and you start experiencing life, and you start acting differently, you start treating people differently, you start speaking differently, you start, you get a little bit more involved in the reading of the Bible as much or as little as you want. And I think it's just a metamorphosis, if you will, of a transition in your life.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that it is something, like I said, to where you carry a Bible around with you and you've got Post-it notes stuck out, and every page has writing in the tabs and highlighted. It's just, it's not that. It's not that. I try to be as private as I can about my faith. Simply because that's what works for me.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I can tell you just from characteristics and whatnot that you can tell that you're walking the walk. So, so when this, just to move that story forward, on, you said whenever this instance occurred, and you felt like it was that revival of your faith, if you will. What followed that time?
Well,
How did it change you?
well, I think it was, it wasn't, maybe it wasn't so much of how it changed me, Brian.
Mhm.
It was how it changed people around me.
Gotcha.
Because when I made the decision to, and you and I have talked about this before, when I made this decision, even though people were telling me, many people were telling me, you need to read this book, you need to read this chapter of this book, and you need to do this and that, and I would do that, and I would look around, and I would do internet searches, and I finally, so what I want to tell people about that is that's great.
Mhm.
Getting help and encouragement from other people, who have made the decision to surrender their life to Christ is great. But you have to find out what's going to work for you. You have to
Absolutely.
find maybe that book or maybe that chapter or even that verse like I did where you have to start.
Right.
And for me, it was Colossians chapter 3. And you and I
Okay.
have talked about this. It's
Yeah.
like, where can I start? And I came across Colossians chapter 3, which is living as those made alive in Christ. And that caught my eye. And when I started reading it, it just stuck with me. It's like, yeah, I can do that. It's like, I shouldn't be doing that. I shouldn't be doing that. I shouldn't be doing that. And yeah, I can do that. So I started there. And like you and I said, one of the first things I did was I took filthy language out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And then it was like, especially being in the fire service, it was like, what the heck is
Yeah,
wrong?
that can be hard to do around Firehouse sometimes.
What the heck is wrong with this guy? What sort of medicine do they have him on now to where he doesn't do that? And it was real tough. And it was other things, whether it was watching a certain type of movie on TV or whether it was and again I get back to how you speak to people, how you treat people, how you stop judging people, and it's a whole life change, and it's almost like getting off a drug because you've been this way for so long, as the Bible says, and just like it says in Colossians, you shed that old person and you become new. Well, it's very, very relieving for the person who does that, but for everybody around you, it's just a culture shock.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's going on here? When's he going to get over this? When are we going to get the old Dave Parker back? We love the old Dave Parker, and it's like, hey, that guy's gone.
Yeah.
That guy's gone.
So
And-
did your family take notice first, or do you think that it was more evident around the Firehouse?
Well, that's an interesting question. The pushback came more from my brethren at the Firehouse.
Okay.
In the family, my family was my family was a little more standoffish and okay, this is great, but when's he gonna change back?
Yeah.
To in the fire station, they were more vocal about I guess their displeasure with what I was exhibiting. So,
Okay.
so I was like, wow, I thought this would be easy. It's like, hey, I just followed this passage in here and I'm trying to do this and everybody's giving me pushback, but it's like jumping in a vat of 33-degree water.
Yeah.
It's a shock for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So where were you in your career at this point? Were you a captain? Were you What were you doing at that time?
Yeah, so let me give you, so the suspense will go away. Let me give you kind of background.
Okay.
I was a captain on a ladder truck, and we were at a fire scene, and there was a chief officer there, and I don't know if I did something that he didn't like, or something he perceived that wasn't. And right in the middle of a parking lot, with my crew and with other, of course, with civilians around, he just started screaming at me about something, and cursing at me, and I just remember screaming back at him, and thankfully not using any profanity, but. I knew right at that minute, what I did was inappropriate, and I didn't like it, because not only did my subordinates hear me, but everybody around me heard me, and it was the aha moment in my career.
Yeah.
Now, nothing came of it, because thankfully my crew backed me up,
Okay.
and said, of course, when we got back to the fire station, and it got to the fire chief, it was, thankfully, my crew had enough guts to say, well, this is kind of what happened, and this was what the chief said, and this is what the captain said, and so it kind of just went away. But for me, I'm sure for everybody around me, it was just another day at the fire station.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just that. It was just that.
It was a realization of some sort.
It was like, you got to get control of your life.
Okay.
Or you are going to wind up in a place that you're not going to be happy with. So that was the aha moment, and I can remember it like it was yesterday, even though. It was, 21 years ago?
Okay.
21 years ago.
Wow.
2003. So 21 years ago. And I'm still on my journey. I'm still in the infancy. I tell people all the time, I'm still in the infancy of my journey. And I will be that way until the day the Lord calls me home, because that's how I feel about my faith. There's so much for me to know, and there's so much for me not to know. I mean, the unknown is just as important as the known.
Yeah.
So I just continue every day to try to make myself and the people around me and the world around me just a better place.
Absolutely. Well, what an amazing story. And I think that stories kind of like that are pretty common in the fire service. I know I had a similar circumstance and situation that occurred to me that was kind of like an aha moment, and so I'm sure that the fire service shares similar circumstances and can definitely identify. One of the things I'd also like to talk about is, so from that point forward, when you had that renewal of faith and you were a leader at that time, how did that change the principles of leadership for you? How did that change what you did at work?
Your department needs top-notch recruitment and training videos, but you don't have the time to create them. At Bella Media, we've already helped fire departments like yours tell their story. Let us handle the videos so you can focus on saving lives. Email us at info@bellamedia.com to get started today. That's info@bellamedia.com.
Well, here again, it was literally a culture shock for not only my crew, but the people on my shift, and probably for the people in the front office for me, because I didn't cover up the fact that I would bring my Bible to work, and I would read my Bible, and things would change about what I would watch on TV, and my language or my temperament when we would go on calls, or even around the firehouse. So again, it was it was, not only was I transitioning myself but unwittingly, I was transitioning everybody around me, which was probably the hardest thing to do, because I can remember for years and years and years afterwards, people were saying, yeah, we were just waiting for you to, it was, I would hear all the time, we just want the old Dave Parker back. And I would tell them, I said, you can't have him. You got to put up with what you got now, which, as we all know, in the fire service is generally not what you're usually around.
Right.
And everybody that, unfortunately, that's going to listen to this podcast knows what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So how did it change my leadership style? Brian, I know that I know, again, like I've talked about before, about the infancy of my faith. I always kept in mind that people were going to be looking at me like, oh boy, here's somebody else who, is, rolling down the street with their Bible on their hip, and they're going to try to change me, and they're going to try to change the way I do things. And I remember who you are and what you did, and that. And so I always kept that in mind, that I was in the process of transforming myself, and hopefully in the process of transitioning others when they saw the positive changes in me.
Yeah.
I would say that 99% of the people around me accepted it, and you always had that small percent that never accepted it, and probably still to this day are waiting for me to, I guess,
to go back to the old Dave.
Go back to the old ways. So to answer your question more directly, I knew it was going to be a tough row to hoe, and I knew that if I stayed consistent and I stayed positive and I didn't push people too far, and I didn't push my beliefs off on people, that I knew, again, that my actions and my deeds would speak volumes for themselves.
Absolutely. So you mentioned in some of the documents that you sent to us that you kind of subscribe to a servant leadership style of leadership. I'm interested to see kind of how do you apply that? Like in your leadership now, you've come such a long way, and you've had a very successful career.
Thank you.
And I'm just wondering, just for words of wisdom for other upcoming leaders in the fire service, how do you apply servant leadership to your role and to the roles and expectations of the other leaders that you lead?
Yeah, great question. Servant leadership is a relatively, I guess, new concept. It's probably been around, maybe 20 years. Obviously, there's a lot written about servant leadership. A lot of people are servant leaders or were servant leaders and just never knew it. But when you start making yourself more learned about exactly what it is, what the concepts are, you go, well, I think I do that. I think I can do that. And but it's harder than it sounds. And I think what servant leadership means to me is, and this is probably the hardest thing that is, this is probably the hardest concept for people to grasp, and that is, anything I do, everything I do in my job is with and for the thought of others.
Amen. Absolutely.
Meaning, when I make a decision, even if the decision is for discipline or punishment, it's with that person's best interest in mind. Now, they may not think that.
Sure.
But I can assure you it is. I'm always thinking about the other person. I'm not thinking about myself. How do I do that? Most people will say, be honest with me, be frank, be concise, and get to the point. And that's what I try to do. And most people can't take that. Most people don't like that. They say they want honesty. They say they want you to be frank with them.
Yeah.
They say, get to the point.
And then the truth hurts.
Yeah, and you know what? You need to. That's where thinking of others comes into play, because you don't want someone who I don't know, Brian, let's take, for instance, someone who doesn't do well on a promotional exam.
Okay.
And they're very upset. And of course, all of us who have taken promotional exams think we're the best and we should be promoted and things like that. But people need to hear what's hard. People need to hear what other people think, and more so know. And not everybody can be a leader. I tell people this all the time. You will never know if you are a leader until you're put into that position. You can study, you can test, you can do everything, you can have all sorts of certifications and licenses and degrees, but until you're put into that position, you're either a leader or you're not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes people need to hear that, but it's the way that they hear it, and the way that you project that to them that you can control.
Absolutely.
That you can control. So I try to do that. And another big thing for me is along those same lines is constant communication. Sometimes maybe I over communicate with people. I like to communicate through email, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
When I communicate through email, it can't be filtered.
Sure.
Because it's in writing and everybody sees the same thing. It's going to get filtered anyway, Brian.
Yeah.
Because if you and I read the same email, depending on how you feel about a particular situation, your thought is going to be filtered.
Absolutely.
But you can always go back to whatever is in writing, and you can go, well, it's right here, and this is exactly. This is exactly what I meant. The context is the context. It's what I meant. And I especially like to do that with my chief officers.
Okay.
So, let me give you an example. If I go into a fire station and I talk to the chief on A shift, and I say, hey, chief, next week I'm thinking about doing this and this and that. And so, when he gets relieved on B shift, he passes that down to the B shift chief, and it gets filtered a little bit depending on how that first chief liked or didn't like what I said. And then if the next chief passes it on to the chief on, C shift or D shift, however you go down, all of a sudden, what you said to the first chief,
absolutely,
it's just you know what I'm talking about. And people go, no, how does that happen? And it says, well, work in a fire station for a little while, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And and sometimes I get feedback from my chief saying, gee, you sent out an email and everything, and you could have just come over and told us about it. I'm like, you're right. I could have. You're exactly right. And I said, but I do this for a reason, and the reason is this. And it's the same thing with the firemen. It's you and I've talked about this. It's you go visit a fire station, and the next thing you know, you're something you said in jest, or something that you said is taken out of context, and the next thing you know, the fire chief said, we're going to get pink fire trucks from now on. So it's and I joke, but getting back to the servant leadership, it's a tough row to hoe again with the buddy to boss, and you even as a company officer, that's a tough one. I tell you, and here again, it gets back to you don't know if you're a leader until you're put into that position, and you can lead these guys. You can manage your engine or your truck company when you guys are out there, and your guys respect you, and they jump when you say jump, and then you can the next day head out and go on a hunting trip or a fishing trip or go have lunch or something like that. Yeah. You can separate that.
It's a delicate balance.
That's a delicate balance, and it's a very, very fleeting balance, and it's hard to do.
It is.
I've had it a few times in my career. I'm sure you've had, but and we all want that. We're all human beings.
Sure.
We all want that human contact. I don't care what anybody says. Any person who says, I don't care what Brian thinks about me, if I said that, I'd be lying. I do care about what you think about me and what you would say about me. Yeah. I do care because I'm a human being.
Sure.
I'm a human being, and I think people who say, I don't care, you hear this all the time.
Yeah, hear people say it.
Don't worry about it. Well, no, maybe worry's not the right word, but you should care what people are saying.
Sure.
Now, can you control it? No, you can't. Should you expect 100% compliance or 100% happiness? No. But don't say you don't care, because you do. If you don't care,
I agree.
You've got bigger problems than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people kind of throw that around pretty loosely of, I don't care or whatever, but I think you're right. It's human nature to care about. And as a leader, you should care to a degree about, feedback and this and that. And of course, there's a lot of opinions that float around and whatnot, and that might not be a fact or truth, but it is a delicate balance. Absolutely. Definitely a delicate balance between kind of, I guess the way that I would look at it is a delicate balance between brotherhood and leadership.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely.
You're correct. And it gets more complex as you move up in the ranks, because I think there's a point where I can speak. I went from the company officer rank to the fire chief rank. I skipped everything in between. I was very blessed, and I was given the opportunity to do that. Was I ready for that? Again, I don't think anybody's ever ready for that.
Yeah, I don't think
unless you go from fire
ready.
chief to fire chief. But anytime you slap on the 5 bugles, you're either going to sink or you're going to swim. And that doesn't mean that you'll be removed, because once you're in that position, it's somebody down the somebody, whether it's the city council or whether it's your commissioners or whomever, whether it's a city manager, somebody's put you in that position, and they want to see you succeed because they put you in that position. But I will tell you, there are fire chiefs that shouldn't be fire chiefs, just like there are chief officers that shouldn't be chief officers, and company officers that shouldn't be company officers, and there are firemen that shouldn't be firemen. So there are just some people that are in this job, like many jobs, that maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe they shouldn't be. So,
Absolutely.
And I think that's just life. So, servant leadership again it's a simple it's a simple concept. If you ask people if they know what servant leadership is, they'll tell you absolutely, and you'll probably get You'll probably get a cadre of responses for that
Yeah.
from them. But
I've noticed that. Yeah.
yeah, you need to, you need to drill down and really understand what it means, and really understand that it is self-sacrifice, and it is, like I said, thinking of others, putting others first. And it's sometimes that's tough.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like and I don't know, maybe this is just my own perception, but it seems like it's harder and harder these days. And maybe it just becomes more evident to me as I've moved up in the ranks that it's harder and harder to find people that are willing to make a lot of those personal sacrifices, to lead others in the ways that servant leadership would require. So, kind of an offshoot of that, what do you feel like are the most important characteristics and attributes of, let's say, a captain or maybe a lieutenant or a district chief, somebody kind of at that operations level? When you as a leader, what do you think is the most beneficial characteristics for those people to have?
Leadership has, now this is my opinion, but you can quote me. In my estimation, in my experience, leadership has everything to do with an individual's character and very little to do with skill.
Okay.
What do I mean about that? You can follow a guy who you can follow the proverbial fire god, okay, and you can follow him right over a cliff, because generally that's where guys like that will lead you.
Yep, I agree.
Now, are there some guys who can bridge the gap? Absolutely. Nothing is ever 100% black and white in this life. But give me a man that has personal and professional dignity and character, and I'm not saying incompetence, but I'll take a lower skill level over the fire god for a guy that I know is spiritually, emotionally, physically where he needs to be over, like I said, somebody who's not. Because I can respect that man as a person instead of respecting that man for his skill level.
Gotcha. And there's probably a lot to be said too about, as you move up in the ranks in the fire service, how you don't leave those old, fireground skills behind, but the skill set has to change a little bit too. And the skill set, like you say, kind of morphs into character more than a physical skill. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think as you move from rank to rank, and hopefully your education level, both technically and scholastically improves also. That a lot of what we do, Brian, is more about, as I take a big breath, is more about how we respond to any situation rather than reacting to it. Because generally, as the fire chief goes, so goes the department. And I think you can, with your experience, you can look at that and see. Now, there's exceptions to the rule, but it's easy to react. It's much more difficult to respond.
Absolutely.
And I have to check myself sometimes as well.
Me too. Absolutely.
And I think that comes with, like I said, and here again, like I told you, the more bugles we get on our collar, the more responsibility we have, and people expect us to act in a certain manner. And if we don't, then if we act in an aberrant manner or some other manner unbefitting a chief officer, then the people below you believe that that's the norm, that's okay.
Yeah.
And then when it happens, and that chief officer sees his behavior in his subordinates, well, what's that chief officer going to do? He's probably going to lash out in a manner that subordinate doesn't understand. And it's like, well, you act that way, why can't I?
Yeah.
So
it's almost contagious in a way.
I want, I don't want a bunch of little Dave Parkers running around, but I want, well, edit that out.
Yeah.
But I don't want people to emulate me. I want people to see how I am and understand where I am is for a reason. And maybe that reason is how I carry myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to
the why behind it.
As opposed to the way I used to carry myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it sounds like based off of that information, and that's a hard thing to get people that are coming up in leadership and coming up in the fire service to understand, is the statement of lead by example and what that means as far as, and how much influence that can really have on the people that you work around. So yeah, leading by example is definitely a high priority, especially in the fire service, because they're going to emulate whatever their leadership.
There's no question. There's no question. If they see you growing, hopefully they'll want to grow as well. And simply because a fire chief has reached possibly the pinnacle of his career or the pinnacle of the fire service career, we shouldn't stop growing in any regard. We should, we need to keep up to date with, the latest, rescue tools and the latest innovations in fire apparatus and things like that. Just not focusing in on the business part of what we do. So, because, the guys will recognize that. I mean, and the guys will go, well, he's kind of a dinosaur. And it's like, well, that can happen. That can happen to some chiefs. And that's not the way you want to, that's certainly not the way I want to be perceived. And I hope I'm not perceived that way, because I think I do, I think I do a pretty good job at that, at keeping up with what's going on within the fire service.
Absolutely.
So, we were talking about, and I'm looking at my notes here, so there's a few things that I think are very, very important as far as when we talk about leadership. I think people need to embrace, not only recognize, but embrace the fact that you are going to have disagreement and even conflict throughout your career.
Absolutely.
It is, however, how you present your point, how you listen to the other person's point, and how you either come to an agreement or you come to a amicable disagreement.
Yeah.
The point is, if there is not an atmosphere where people can express their point of view without getting personal, then you're not going to grow.
Right.
If we all ran around black and white, we're not going to grow. Yeah. It's getting back to there's no black and white. There is black and white, but there's no black and white. So it's getting back to allowing Brian and Dave to say, no, I like this fire truck manufacturer more than I like that fire truck manufacturer because of this and that and this and that. And conversely, you say the opposite, and we we're able to express ourselves, and somebody is going to walk away disappointed. And what I say is this: I have never seen an apparatus committee, a bunker gear committee, a rescue tool committee, a hand tool committee, a ventilation saw committee. I've never seen a committee where everyone walked away happy.
Right. Absolutely.
Just haven't seen it. And people go, well, how come that is? I said, because people are individuals.
Right.
And, but they need to be able to express themselves, get their point. They want to be heard. Firemen want to be heard.
Absolutely.
If you can, and just like I want to be heard. And just like your subordinate chiefs want to be heard, you need to foster an atmosphere like that. And it gets back to the servant leadership where you go, I'm thinking of others. It's, you know as well as I do, being a chief officer, that, sometimes some of the things that may, I don't want to say, I'll just use the word upset. Some of the things that may, ruffle a fireman's feathers, when you hear about them, or it's like, Chief, how come we can't have, this on the fire truck? If we had this on the fire truck, we could do our job so much better. Or, Chief, why can't we have this in the fire station? And it's, you need to be able to listen to the firemen, and, maybe sometimes they have a good idea, or maybe sometimes they make you rethink your decision.
Yeah.
And here again, as a chief, it's okay. It's okay to say, guys, that wasn't the best decision in the world, so we're going to change things. A lot of chief officers, man, if they make a decision, that's it, and they don't want to go back because. And I'm, I'm just okay with doing, with saying, guys, that wasn't the best decision in the world. We won't do that again, and we'll move on. But and a lot of chief officers won't do that.
Yeah.
But
that's a big aspect of growth too.
Sure.
Just being able to say, hey, I'm human. It was a mistake, and then move forward.
Sure. Just
Absolutely.
Understanding that we're not infallible. We do make mistakes, and I think the worst thing you can do is hide your mistake. The worst thing you can do is hide your mistake,
I agree with you.
Because somebody saw it, somebody recognized it, and you just need to man up and accept it and move along. That people will respect you more for that. So.
Absolutely.
You have a message the world needs to hear, but you're not sure where to start. At Bella Media, we make podcasting easy. Our studio is open Monday through Friday, starting at just $100. You bring the story, we provide the space. Let's get your voice out there. Email us at info@bellamedia.com to book your session today. That's info@bellamedia.com.
So, how has your experience been? Well, let me back up for a minute. Let me ask you this: of the fire service is full of a million different things, controversies, topics, room for improvement, and so many other different things. What do you think is one of the biggest hurdles that's facing fire and emergency services today?
Wow. How much time do we have? I'll start off with saying we have 4 different generations right now in the fire service. I think us old guys, and I can say that because I am one, being a baby boomer, just recognizing that the technology is just rampant. Whether it is obviously whether it's on the fire apparatus or whether it's with a hand tool, the technology is just rampant.
It's growing very quickly.
Yeah. With that said, it's what I see a lot of in the fire service is interpersonal dynamics and interpersonal communication skills lacking in probably at least the last 2 generations. and recognizing that and trying to find a happy median to for communicating efficiently and effectively with the guys who are out there, in the field doing the work. So I think that, I think technology is great. I think the advancements are great. I'm sure that people at the back in the turn of the 20th century, when we went from horses to steam engines to internal combustion engines, and now we're looking at EV and things like that. It's just a part of growth, and I think that you need to recognize it and you need to embrace it. But you also need to never forget that there's a fire tetrahedron for a reason, and you need to remember it.
Yeah.
And you need to use it. And
it's the basis of truth in the fire service
there
and
you
fire
go.
science.
all the technology in the world ain't going to make that fire go out unless you
Unless you
interrupt
address
that chain reaction, take away the heat, take away the fuel, take away the oxygen. So it's a lot of times, and some of these guys, I say guys, some of these people maybe rely a little bit too much on technology and not enough on what actually needs to be done. Certainly, mental health.
That was going to be kind of the next thing that I was going to talk about, actually. You read my mind.
I was actually talking to my son today, and I just feel so fortunate and blessed that literally being in the fire service and of course being involved in EMS for literally since I was 16 years old. And I am so blessed to where I'm sure that what I've seen over my career in some ways impacts me, but I'm fortunate enough to where I don't, it hasn't impacted me to the point to where I haven't been able to function, or I have looked for substitutions for therapy other than going and talking to people. So I recognize that it's a big challenge for us because I think that there's a lot more going on today than there has been in the past decades. I think there's a lot more. I think people are a lot more aware that it's okay to, excuse me, it's okay to, to tell people you have, you're having some problems, you're having some issues, and you need help. And I think nowadays it's being embraced a lot more.
Yeah, I think so too.
Whereas when I came in the fire service, you simply didn't do that.
Me too.
So
when I was coming up in the fire service, it was like you just kept going and you didn't say anything about it.
Sure,
which probably made the problem worse.
Absolutely, you just bury it and lock it away, and that's what we were told to do. Like being closed up inside of a enclosed cab, and you got your captain up there in the front, and he's pulling down a Marlboro Red, and you're on your way to a fire. It's that's just the way it was back then. So
yeah.
But anyway, so technology and mental health, mental awareness. I think you've got you've got more females in the fire service now, and you also have transitional people in the fire service now. So that's something that you're has to be embraced. However you feel about any of those situations. You've got people that coming out, whether whether they be gay or lesbian or coming out, it's okay. And whereas when I was coming up, you simply didn't talk about that. So It's which I think is a good thing. I think you need to embrace people, no matter how people. I shouldn't say no matter how people. People can feel the way they feel about that, but at the end of the day, if people can do the job and they should be embraced. So
Sure.
I think that's another area.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk about the fact that fires are burning quicker and hotter, and cars are faster and things like that. But I think the biggest thing we need to keep in mind is when things change, they're changing for a reason, and they generally change for the better. And we need to move with the change. We can't be stuck.
Yeah.
We cannot be stuck in the past and say,
Yep.
why can't it be like this, or why can't we have this? It's just like, because if we had that same mindset, we wouldn't have toilets, or we wouldn't have telephones, or we wouldn't have look at the cell phone. It's like, can you imagine life without a cell phone? And
Not
I can
anymore.
tell you, I can. Life went on just fine, but if you think about it now, I don't even know if you can find a payphone anymore. But the cell phone, no matter what you think about it, has changed everybody's life. Just as I was talking to somebody today, it's like, I got all the time in the world as long as I got my smartphone with me. They can get me, and I can do my job. So
Absolutely. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here today. Everything's been very insightful, very helpful, and I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here and spending time with us today, sharing your thoughts and feelings, and I think it'll be very helpful to a lot of people. So thank you.
I appreciate it. And if I could close,
Sure.
Again, it's very important to me if there's someone out there that is struggling, that is lost, like I was once lost, I beg of you, I pray for you to reach out to someone, whether it is local clergy, whether it is a friend that you know is a believer. I ask you to reach out.
Absolutely.
Don't suffer in silence, because
Absolutely.
it won't end well.
That's right.
And I will again mention Colossians chapter 3. It's where I started. It can be a rather biting chapter, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read just
Absolutely,
a couple of paragraphs, and
Absolutely.
and because it is what saved me.
Please do, please.
So
Absolutely.
Colossians chapter 3 reads, it's living as those made alive in Christ. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator.
What an amazing way to close. That's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thanks, Brian. I've enjoyed my
I really
time.
think I really think it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you.
Good. Thank you for having me, and I hope you have me back.
You bet. Absolutely. Any day.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you so
sir.
much.
All right.
Command, Engine 10, First Line Attack, making entry.